Why don't you just take 2 minutes and give us more context on your background?
Yeah, so I'm a electrical engineer is what I studied to be. During college, I went down that path because I'm really good with numbers, always been good at math, and just seemed like the logical path. But at some point, I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. I really wanted to own my own business and started researching successful individuals and just I kept getting drawn to real estate investing. They either made their wealth that way or they built onto their wealth using real estate. So I got my mortgage broker license. I got my realtor's license because I didn't know any better. I thought I had to do that, kind of go through the process. Finally hired a coach on single family investing and started doing some deals. At that point, I was working at UPS in their engineering department. Did enough to where I quit my W-2, and that was 16 years ago. Been doing real estate investing full time since. It's definitely been a journey, but about 4.5 years ago, I got introduced to multifamily syndications, and I knew that was the path I wanted to go down. I mean, I had been scaling the single family, and I felt like I kind of hit my brick wall with that. I had started doing some new construction and getting a little more creative, but man, the second that somebody explained to me that I can buy 100 units at one time and I didn't have to come in with the millions and millions of dollars myself, I went all in. So that was 4.5 years ago. To this day, we just closed on one this week, and that put me over 6,000 units that I've acquired. Exited out of about 1,400, going to be 1,500 here soon. And like you said, man, looking to get to that 10,000 this year, and I think it's doable.
Man, great stuff there. You talked about having that background as an electrical engineer, really looking at, real estate, knowing that you wanted to start investing. You started with single family homes, and then over the last 4 years have focused more on multifamily. And if this is right, you said over the last 4 years, you've acquired over 6,000 doors, and you've exited actually 1,400, almost 1,500 doors. That's huge growth, for, everyone listening. 6,000 doors in 4 years that's an incredible amount. Just talk to us a little bit more about how you believe you were able to acquire so many units in such a short time frame.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has to do with systems, right? Implementing the right systems within the company. A lot of it is the work that I put in the first year. The second year, once I closed a couple of deals, it really started to grow exponentially. You build that track record, you start getting first look at deals from brokers. I've positioned myself well by a lot of networking and building a social media platform where now a lot of our deal flow is coming from other investors, bringing it to us and wanting us to help them close. So I think I just kind of positioned myself and built that foundation for growth. Like I knew I wanted to scale and I wanted to do this big. And I've done it with my other businesses, but this time I was a little more strategic with the way I did it.
Yeah, I think the intentionality of how you grew that is so important. And maybe we can dive a little bit more into that, right? You have the electrical engineering background. You were doing single families. Walk me through maybe that first multifamily deal. And at what point did you say, okay, I need some systems and processes if I want to replicate this and build this big business that I'm trying to grow?
Yeah, so the first deal partnered with somebody that had a bit of experience. And the one thing, so I knew I could find deals, right? I had been finding deals for 11 years at that point, single family. That's what we did. We didn't buy from other wholesalers. We hunted and found the deal. So I knew that wasn't going to be an issue. I felt pretty strong on the operation side. I had the construction company. I felt comfortable with the CapEx. The only part I hadn't done was raise equity. on our single family, we had a couple private lenders, and then we were at to the point where we're just using our own funds. So that was new. So I hooked up with somebody that they had raised equity. So our first one, they raised the equity and signed on the loan. I pretty much and my team did everything else. We were boots on the ground, operator. So from doing that deal, right away, I realized, okay, to scale this, there's a lot of different things going on when you're doing multifamily. It's not like single family that's pretty simple, and even with single family, if you want to scale, you need systems too. But in multi, there's just a lot going on at the same time. So it was right around after closing that deal that I started implementing checklists and certain procedures when doing our due diligence, making sure we've got a finalized scope of work before we close, so that day one we're working on it. Certain KPIs that we're going to track on a weekly basis, just things like that.
No, great stuff. I think the lesson there is that, one, figure out what you're good at and what you can do, what you're confident in, right? All of us have something we can do or something that we can bring value to. But we also have those spots where maybe there's either a weakness or inexperience. And for you, you knew you could operate, you knew you could find deals, but you had no experience raising money. So you aligned with someone who had that experience and that expertise, partner together to take down this first deal. And as you grow and as you scale, you may be able to take on those other roles and responsibilities or build those out in your processes. But starting out, make it easy. Find those people who can help you eliminate the weakness, or they can supplement any areas where you may not have that strength, and it makes it so much easier to see success. And I'm glad you just shared that's how you started, because that's the truth for a lot of people. When you're starting out, you don't have experience. So you may have experience in one area, but you're not going to have experience everywhere. So find someone who does and supplement that.
Yeah, it seems like it makes sense, right? But you'd be surprised. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it too, but where people partner with each other and they've got they don't complement each other, right? They can both do the same thing well. Maybe it's just because I don't know, but
well, they get along, right? So you get along,
right.
you have
That's
somebody, you have a great vibe, great rapport, but you
Correct.
realize you both bring the same skill set to the table, and there's still a glaring weakness in the business. And any successful business, I mean, you've got your departments, right? You got your HR, your operations, you got your finance, you've got your marketing, your sales folks, production if you're actually producing or creating something. So you have to have people who can run those departments. And if you just get two people who are the same person or they have the same skill set, that's not going to set you up for a successful business or a successful partnership. So I do think it's important to align yourself with people who bring whatever you're missing to the table so you can scale and grow. I think the other challenge that a lot of people have is just finding a person that they feel comfortable partnering with. So obviously this changes over time, but going back to that first partnership, how did you get to the point where you felt comfortable moving forward with that partnership? Because I think a lot of people just, again, don't they want to do it themselves. Most people get into real estate because you like the autonomy of doing your own thing, and trusting someone else to do their part maybe is a lot for someone to take on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends where you want to go with it and how you want to do it. You can definitely do this all on your own. But you're only going to be able to do so much.
Not 6,000 units.
Correct. And you could decide to still do it on your own and not have partners and build out the internal team, right? But that's also easier said than done. So to answer your original question, to me, I've learned throughout the years, people first. So I get to know the person. And if I like them and I think our values are aligned, then I go to the next step. How is there synergy? Are there things that they bring to the table that I don't, or vice versa? But I would say the first thing is the person. Do you guys, can you get along? Can you work through issues? And do you like them?
Yeah, I think that's just really it's so challenging for people because partnerships, they can be deep relationships, almost like a marriage, but they also can be a just for a deal. They could just be, hey, let's work together on this. Let's make sure we're clear on our roles and responsibilities. And you kind of see how things evolve from there. As you've talked about the different partnerships you have working with various investors. What are some of the practices and the systems you've put in place to help have those strong relationships and strong partnerships with the different groups and different people that you partner with?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things. So one, we're very upfront with the roles and responsibilities, who's going to handle what, what does that look like, monetary, value, on the GP splits. And so that's one, being straightforward with exactly how that's going to work out, getting that out of the way, making sure everybody's on the same page, and then communicating throughout the process. Like, every one of our deals, we have a weekly asset management meeting. On top of that, we've got a monthly GP meeting. So, I mean, we're constantly communicating with each other. And I think when there's issues is one, the opposite, right? If there's not clear communication on whose roles what, or who's getting what percentage of what for doing what, there's issues that can arise from that. And then if you're not communicating on a constant basis, issues can arise from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit it right. Roles and responsibilities, that being clear. Compensation is always a thing, right? So make sure everyone's clear on compensation, but then the communication. I mean, ultimately it comes down to clear communication. So if everyone knows what the expectation is going into it, if there's an issue, they can decide not to move forward at that point. But as long as that's clear up front and throughout the entire process, that's going to be the best way to manage and navigate those different relationships. So I love the points you made there. You talked about, one of the things you've developed is like checklists and also understanding the due diligence process. What are some of the checklists, and are there things that you think many other operators or newer syndicators miss that you're kind of surprised or you realize, hey, you know what? Everyone really needs to understand these are some key items that need to be on those checklists.
Yeah, I get really surprised all the time. Mainly, I see somebody close on a 100+ unit property. They've raised a certain amount of equity, and their capex is pretty much just a guess. They had these 60 to 90 days to figure it out. And they spent the whole time raising equity and not thinking about the actual business plan and the capex. So they spent months trying to figure it out and wasting time in my eyes. So I think that's a huge mistake. I think I understand why, raising equity is a grind and it takes a lot of effort. And that's obviously your main concern, right? You want to be able to close the deal, but you've got to come up with systems and timelines on getting your scope of work for your capex ironed out as well. There's not one deal that we close on that we're not day one starting to implement the business plan. So, back to those checklists. One of them is making sure we've got our rough scope of work from our property tour. Like for us, it starts with our property tour. We tour the property, we haven't submitted anything. Coming out of that, we're going to have a rough scope of work of what we think needs to be done with the capex. And then that's ever changing throughout the process, right? We maybe on our research, we figure out, what we need to do this to the interior units, not, we need to put in stone and not resurface the Formica, whatever it is. Then we do our due diligence. So once we do our due diligence, we're going to discover other things. We're going to change the scope of work possibly. And from that period on till we close, we're constantly meeting and figuring out exactly what that final scope is going to be, to the point where we're having a pre-construction meeting, and then boom, day one, we're there.
Yeah, I want to replay some of that. I think those are great insights that our listeners have to understand. First of all, you talked about making sure you take that due diligence time to confirm the scope of work. That scope of work starts before you even put in your offer. So you're talking about a rough scope of work when you're touring a property, when you're first analyzing a deal and you're looking at it to see if it's an opportunity. You're going to develop a rough scope of work to figure out, okay, if we buy this thing, what do we need to put into it? What do we need to fix? And then at every stage, you get more information, you get clarity, you get understand, hey, you know what? This is actually going to be more involved than we thought, or we're going to have to replace this, or you know what? We don't need this. We need to, upgrade to that. So as you get new information, you can revise that scope of work. But this is an ongoing process up until you get to the point of closing where you can go ahead and implement the business plan. The other thing you said was you have a pre-construction meeting. For folks who are maybe not as familiar with the construction process, give us a little more context. When you say pre-construction, what do you mean? And at what stage are you kicking off these pre-construction meetings?
Yeah. So, we've had construction company for 13 years now. We've done, starting with the single family all the way till now. Done a lot of third party work too. And the only time we've come into issues has been when there's not, and I hate to say this again, but clear communication. And what a pre-construction meeting does is it brings everybody involved in that project together, and we go over the scope in detail. We go over, once again, whose roles and responsibilities for everything. So we've got the ownership, we've got the property manager, we've got our construction team. Everybody's there. Everybody's clear of who's doing what. For you to implement the business plan, especially with the interior units. I mean, the exterior has got some complications too, but the interior units, you've got to work as a team, especially the construction team and the property management team. I know some folks use the property manager to do some of those repairs, but obviously with our construction company, we found that it works a lot better when you have somebody else focusing on the CapEx, and let the property manager focus on the property and the management of it. So yeah, everybody, usually we do that meeting. So we'll have, I guess, two, right? We'll have one where we're kind of finalizing the scope of work. And that'll be before we close. And then we'll have one as soon as we close on site, where we actually, then we're walking the final scope of work and we're pointing things out, and we're talking about where the dumpsters are going to go, where the storage unit's going to go, how we're going to keep track of the units, etc.
Hey man, I really love that insight. First of all, you're talking about, again, rough scope of work before you even put in that offer. You're having that pre-construction meeting once you kind of get a better sense of who the players are going to be, what is the scope that you're going to do. And then once you close, you're on site, you're pointing things out, you're making sure everybody's crystal clear on what the business plan is, what the game plan is of construction, and you all are able to move forward with that execution. Clear communication is key. And I'll tell you, even from the deals we've done, especially when I was early on with my projects, we did not have like a full blown out scope of work initially, right? You kind of walk in with the contractor, you point out stuff and you tell him, hey, I want to do X, Y, Z. He comes back with a loose scope, and, you say, cool, you can get into the process, but then you realize, hey, you know what? Why didn't you put door pulls? Why didn't you put handles on the cabinets? Oh, that wasn't in the scope. What do you mean it's not in the scope? Isn't that assumed? I mean, I talked to somebody else who was like, yeah, I didn't know you wanted hinges for the door. It's like, why would you put in doors and not plan to buy the hinges that go on the door? So it may seem silly, and obviously I'm not being facetious, this is true, but these are things that are less likely to happen. But when you are building out the scope, you do have to be clear on, hey, when I say install doors, I want to make sure that you understand that means all the hardware that's necessary, any door stops that are necessary, door handle, all of that. That's what's included, or the expectation. So as we get that quote, we're all aligned. And, to the point George is making, you have to make sure you sit down, you go through this, especially if you work with a contractor that you're not familiar with, because they may make different assumptions, or maybe, and it could go the other way too. I mean, they could go super high in on stuff, especially if they're used to doing class A type finishes. And if you've got a C class property, like, wait a minute, man, you're spending way too much money on things that we don't need to upgrade, you know? So you definitely want to make sure that there's clarity when you are devising that scope.
Yeah, I want to highlight something you said there. So you said assume, right? So we do not like to assume in the construction world. Our scopes are extremely detailed. So they're extremely detailed for that very reason. You know, if it's not listed in our scope of work, it is most likely not included, but there's a lot listed there. So when somebody hands me a paragraph and they say, yeah, this is my scope of work, I freak out because that's not enough, man. It should be line item by line item by line item, showing you the quantity. You should have a type of finish out. You know, if you're interior units, so we have different classes of finish outs, and with that, we've got specs. So we've got a spec sheet that tells you exactly what we're going to be putting in the units. You know, I see people all the time sign a scope with a contractor, and it just says upgrade the unit. It's like, okay, well, what are they going to put, man? Like, you know, what kind of faucet are they going to put in there? What kind of, all kinds of stuff. So, yeah.
And earlier we talked about understanding what you're good at and trying to find partners to supplement those areas. This is one where I absolutely, you know, lean on partners because you're so spot on. I mean, it takes such a level of detail that, you know, the average person would, again, I'll use the word assume stuff is included, and maybe even think it's common sense, and get super frustrated. But you have to understand, contractors just think differently. They're very literal, right? It's a measure twice, cut once mentality. So if it's not there, if it's not in the scope, if it's not written out, you could assume they're probably not going to either do it, or, you know, they may be interpreting it differently. My sister just did a rehab on a home that she was selling, and they installed the countertop, but the countertop, they had to go past where the window is, but they measured, that's what it said. Anyone looking knows, hey man, cut the counter where the cabinet's in. Maybe you have a, you know, an inch or 2 inch, you know, overhang, but you don't take it all the way to the end of the window where now you can't even open up the door. But that's exactly what they did. And it was like one of those things was like, again, the contractor came, saw it, fixed it. But I'm sure the guy who was installing the counters just looked at the piece of paper in front of him, said up 19 inches, whatever it was, and slapped it in. So again, it seems ridiculous, seems like it might be common sense, but I will tell you, I think it's a super important skill. If you don't have it, you need to make sure someone on your team has that ability to kind of stay dug in deep in the details here, because it's just an important aspect. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of that due diligence process, because I think that's one of the things that when I started seeing some of your social media work, I thought stood out, because you were doing property tours and you were talking about, you know, water lines and checking the water lines and all this different stuff. And there is so much that goes into the due diligence process on a property. You know, we all get excited about finding a deal, underwriting a deal, getting under contract, raising the capital, but very seldom do we talk about the due diligence process and ensuring we understand what's really happening at the property and how we need to adjust our business plan to address any issues that may pop up during DD. Talk to me a little bit more about kind of the way you approach due diligence and any common things that you think other operators miss.
Yeah. So, you know, we take our due diligence pretty serious, and it's the time, you know, everything now, you're pretty much going hard day one on deposits for the most part, unless it's off market and maybe you're dealing straight with the seller. But still, I mean, there's some stuff, depending on what you find, it may be worth walking away and even losing that hard money, depending on what you find. So, I mean, I think everybody should take it pretty serious. We always walk every single unit. You know, if it's an A class, actually, we just closed one at the end of the year. A class, literally built last year. We walked all 396 units. You just never know what you're going to find, and that's the time to find it, not later on when you're already capitalized the deal. And, you know, what if it's $100,000, $200,000 mistake? I'll give you an example. We just did due diligence on a new deal last week. walk in all the units. We walk into one unit and there is a 8x8 hole in the concrete slab. You got a plumber in there, and they're replacing a massive sewer line that
In the unit.
in the unit.
So this isn't in the basement or crawl space. This is in the unit.
Right. There's no. You've got some pier and beam in Texas, but most of the stuff is slab, and there's no basements. So if you need to fix a sewer line, you've got to break two ways. You can either go through the outside and tunnel, which is very expensive, or you break the concrete and you get to the line that way. So, the seller's fixing it, right? But now it's on our radar. We're going to check it and we're going to make sure he fixes it right. And, all that stuff. We always scope all the sewer lines. Sewer lines can be very expensive. Like I just mentioned, if you've got a tunnel or depending on how much of the line you got to replace, especially if something's older than 1980s. And it has cast iron. Cast iron has got to be one of the worst materials they ever decided to use for sewer lines. It just begins to crumble. And sometimes there might be an issue. You got a crack in the line in one spot, and you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to tie in right in that one spot. But then as you try to tie in with PVC, it just crumbles and crumbles and crumbles, and you end up replacing 100 feet of a sewer line. So I mean, that's checking every line, scoping the sewer lines. Checking every unit, scoping the sewer lines. Those are probably the two that really stand out to me. There's other things like the drainage. I don't think I've walked a property yet that has proper drainage, and I'm just like, wow, this is great. And when I say drainage, I mean a building should be built with the proper grading. And if it can't have the proper grading, it should have the proper drainage to make sure that any water that accumulates around the building flows away from it. If you have water sit by the foundation of a building, it's going to cause issues. I think those three things.
I love it, man. Three things right there you talked about. One, make sure you always walk every single unit. Even if it's a brand new property, you never know what you're going to find. Two, you talked about always having the sewer line scoped, especially if it's an older property built before 1980s, or if it has kind of that cast iron piping. You want to make sure that you fully understand what's going on there. So getting those scoped. And then last, check for drainage. You don't want to have pools of water near the foundation. That could be indicative of a bigger issue. So you want to check for drainage and check for the grading of a property. And those three things are common areas that you can make sure you do on every property to ensure you understand at least what some of the hidden expenses that could pop up. We always look at roofs and other things too.
Yeah, those are a little more obvious, I think.
Right. So there's to your point, there are other obvious things that we look for. Try to stick to the things that maybe aren't as obvious, or said differently, the things that maybe people misinterpret. So looking for water spots is something that's really common when you are doing your due diligence. You walk in the unit, you're looking up, you're seeing if there's any water stains on the ceiling. Maybe looking down if you're in a garden unit. What are some things that when you're in that unit could be indicative of a bigger issue that maybe people miss or don't fully understand what they're looking at?
Yeah, I think the example I was about to say is foundation. So in Texas, you've got a lot of foundation that shifts. We got horrible soil here. So a lot of the times an investor, you can tell if the foundation, for the most part, you can tell if the foundation is pretty off. Like you can actually see the floor sloping, or you can see major cracks in the walls. So they get the foundation checked, and the foundation company comes and says, okay, you're going to need, it's going to cost $30,000 to put this many piers. But what gets missed all the time is, why did that happen? There's a reason, an underlying issue of why the foundation shifted. And it's usually for two reasons. You have water getting under the foundation somehow, which is either the drainage, which we already talked about, and also the sewer that we talked about. If your sewer line's leaking and just dumping water into your foundation, you're going to have foundation issues. If your drainage is taking the water towards your building, you're going to have foundation issues. But it's funny how you'll get all this money on what it's going to cost to lift the foundation and fix it, but then that same underlying issue is still there. And yeah, the foundation company is not going to tell you. 90% of them don't deal with drainage, and they're just going to come and lift the foundation, but not tell you, hey, you got to fix this drainage over here.
Man, that's a great point there. Just understanding again, don't just treat the symptoms, treat the actual issue that's going on so you can fix it and fix it the right way. You got a lot of great information. I wish we could just keep talking and going deeper and deeper on some of these things. But George, I know you work with both other operators as well as passive investors who are interested in working with you on some of your deals. Your website is elevatecig.com. Investors, you can go there and learn a little bit more about George and sort of projects he has going on there. George, I want to move on to a round of insights. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
George, give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Yeah, I can give you one. Major one was, when I began scaling the single family and also scaling the construction company, I decided on the construction company, it took on a life of its own, and I started to put a little bit more focus on that and not so much on the investment side. And for some reason decided to do third-party work for homeowners. So I went away from my original strategy was work with investors to homeowners and started doing some custom homes and whatnot. And it became a bit much. So working with homeowners is a whole other ball game, and it distracted me. In other words, from my main goal, which was the investment company. I started the investment company. I started the construction company to lift the investment company, which, I'm okay with having them both sit alone as well, but just keep your eye on the prize and your focus. Like, there's a lot of noise out there. So yeah, just focus on your goals, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
There you go. All right. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Digital or mobile resource, like softwares in a sense?
Yeah, software and application, anything that's either on your phone or that you use with your team to help with communications, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, Syndication Pro, our investor portal, has made a massive difference in how quick we can raise equity, how easy it is to communicate. Once again, communicate with the investors. So yeah, I highly recommend Syndication Pro. I know if you mention my name, they'll take care of you. I'm good friends with the owners there.
There you go. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
And I always recommend, and we're both going to this event here soon, but Joe Fairless's best ever, I forget the name,
Best ever apartment syndication book.
Yeah, man. I think he did an amazing job kind of breaking it down and going just deep enough on every section. Like, I feel like a beginner can really grab that and have a good grasp on what it takes.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Daily habits, yes. So we just talked about focusing, and you just said it, right? Focus on your goals. So I pick up to 3 rocks every day. 3 things that I know I need to get done that day, and I keep it in front of me, and I make sure that I knock them out. No matter, fires are going to come up here and there, but those are my priorities for that day.
All right, and give me your number 1 insight for multifamily investing.
Man, like staying in the data, or what exactly do you mean by that? Just number 1.
Hey, whatever if you could give one piece of advice, your golden rule for multifamily investing.
Okay, gotcha. I don't want to say the same thing okay. I was gonna say stay focused, but I'll change it. And we already talked about it too, but partnering with others that complement yourself, those strategic partnerships. If you really want to get started and move quickly, partner with those that complement you well and that possibly have experience, so you're learning from their mistakes versus you having to fall forward. And it's not. I've had my mistakes for sure, and I've learned from each one. But it's nice to learn from somebody else as well.
Exactly. George, where are you located again?
I am in Dallas, Texas.
All right. You're in Dallas. So give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat in Dallas.
Man, I like it. Let me see. I like Gloria's. It's Latin food. Yeah, I'm Cuban and I miss the food from Miami. That's where I'm originally from. So Gloria's helps.
All right, man. Great choice there. Hey, listen, great information. I like the way you really helped us understand more about your own journey. In particular, how you scale. I mean, you talked about in 4 years acquiring 6,000 units, and you were able to do that by creating the right systems and processes to really build. And you knew starting off that, developing the construction company was one great way for you to grow, right? Getting more access to deals and being involved. So we talked a lot about your process for due diligence, creating systems, processes, checklists, and really understanding what it takes to be successful on the operations side. For folks who want to learn more about George and his story, or even investing in some of the opportunities he has, you can go to elevatecig.com. George, I just want to thank you again for coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to seeing you again soon, which will be next week at the time of this recording, but also staying in touch. Take care, George.
Thank you, John.